Look Cinema, the podcast.
So being a policeman is really all about helping people. It's about being a friend. It's not about shooting it out with the bad guys. That's what you see on TV. That's not what it's like. That's not why I wanted to become a cop. Okay, I wanted to become a cop to protect people, to make them feel happy and safe. Everybody understand that? Hi, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. Welcome back, friends. This is the 163rd episode of Backlook Cinema, the podcast where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. Now, if you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that friendly neighborhood police officer. Except for that officer over there. I know he looks charming, but that particular cop is giving me bad vibes. You know what I mean? Stay away from that guy. So, other than that, thanks once again for joining the show and participating in this conversation, this discussion, this examination of one of the movies. This one came out in the 1990s. It was a movie that I was feeling a little bit trepidation about, because I remember when I first saw this movie, I was like, yeah, I really like this movie, but will I like it again? Like, will it feel relevant today? Will I see it in the same light as I saw it when I watched it when it came out in the 1990s? And the movie that I want to talk about is Unlawful Entry. I believe I saw this movie in the movie theater, and this is another action thriller. And there were a lot of action thrillers in the 90s, and the 90s were just chock full of these movies. And I can't wait for those types of movies, the action thrillers, to make a return to the cinema. And this one I found it to be particularly good. So let's go over to the opening credits and talk about this movie. So, Unlawful Entry. Michael and Karen Carr moved out to Los Angeles to build a new life. They moved to a beautiful house in an affluent neighborhood, and Mike found a fantastic business opportunity that will elevate his small family. Then, one terrifying night, their house is broken into, and Karen is threatened by knife point. The intruder gets away, but the couple is shook. The police arrive to investigate and offer comfort and advice. The couple begins a friendly relationship with Officer Pete Davis. Davis, however, becomes fixated and obsessed with the couple, especially Mike's wife, Karen. Davis shows up at odd hours where they live and work, and his behavior makes the couple feel uneasy and threatened. It comes to the point of Mike telling Pete directly and forcefully for Pete to leave them alone. Pete does not leave them alone. Who is the couple going to call when the police are behaving badly? Can you even call the police on the police? Released June 26, 1992, produced by Largo Entertainment and JVC Entertainment Networks, grossing over $57 million in the U.S. and on a reported budget of $23 million. Now, we translate that to today's dollars, then it would have grossed $128 million. And it would have been on a budget of $51 million. And also, that's a pretty healthy profit. It's not like a blockbuster, but it is definitely a respectable profit. This movie was starring Kurt Russell as Michael Carr. And Kurt Russell he's an absolute star. And you've probably seen his movies, including Death Proof, Sky High, Miracle, or And I didn't realize this. He was in Vanilla Sky. It's one of the movies I miss, along with Miracle and Sky High. The only movie that I put on this particular list is Death Proof, but I have seen a lot of Kurt Russell movies, and he's definitely one of my favorite actors. Up next is Ray Liotta. He plays Officer Pete Davis, and you may have seen him in Narc, Goodfellas, Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, and I'm not ashamed to say that I love this movie that I'm about to mention, Cocaine Bear. and he's good in all of these movies, especially Goodfellas. And he's another like outstanding actor. And in this movie, he is particularly good. Up next is Madeline Stowe. She plays Karen Carr, and she's also been in 12 Monkeys, The General's Daughter, Shortcuts, and Last of the Mohicans from 1992. Roger E. Mosley plays Officer Roy Cole. You may have seen him in A Thin Line Between Love and Hate, Heart Condition, or The Greatest. The thing about Roger E. Mosley is that he's mostly a television actor. He has most of his credit is on television, and most people would remember him from the original run of Magnum P.I., where he plays one of Magnum's best friend and a helicopter pilot. Ken Lerner plays Roger Graham, and you may have seen him in The Running Man or Frankie and Johnny Are Married. And he's also mainly a character actor, a mainstay on television. And if there's a television show that you have watched, he's especially in the 80s, 90s, and probably the early 2000s, you've probably seen him show up. Deborah Offner plays Penny, Karen's friend. That's how she's credited. She's been in a lot of movies, including some of your favorites like Black Swan and Cruel Intentions. This movie was directed by Jonathan Kaplan. You may have also seen other movies he's directed like The Accused, White Line Forever, Love Field, or Project X from 1987, or Over the Edge. I wonder, my stomach is grumbling, and I wonder if my mic is picking it up. Oh well, we'll find out when we do the editing. But he's mainly a television director. He hasn't directed a whole bunch of movies, but some of the movies, like I remember Project X, and I don't think I've seen any of these other movies. And I like this movie, Unlawful Entry. So maybe I feel like he's fairly good. He's a fairly good director, and I think he just prefers to direct on television. This movie was written by George Putnam, John Katchmer, and Louis Kolick. Putnam, he has written only one other movie that I could find, and that's Fatal Instinct. And most of his credits involve television, including NYPD Blue and Deadwood. Katchmer has really only written one other thing, and it's a film called Beat the Diva, and I don't even think it's ever been released. There's very little information on this movie. I think the main driver of this movie, the main writer, the writer that did all the heavy lifting is Kolick. And the reason I believe that is because he has an extensive credit list. So he has an extensive filmography. So some of the movies he's written: October Sky, Ladder 49, Charlie St. Cloud, Domestic Disturbance, Ghosts of Mississippi, Judgment Night. So I haven't seen most of these movies, but I've heard they're good. Like I've heard October Sky is good. I think I've heard Ladder 49 is good, or decent at least. I've heard of Domestic Disturbance. I've heard people keep telling me that I should watch Ghost of Mississippi. I've just never gotten around to it. But Judgment Night, I'm all about that one. I love that movie. And that's definitely one of the movies on the list. The music is by James Horner. I've talked about him before. Many of the movies that I've covered on the show have been scored by James Horner. James Horner. And like I've covered Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and I gotta say that's got to be one of my favorite soundtracks. Top 10, probably even top 5. It's a pulse pounding score, and it's so appropriate for what is essentially a submarine battle movie. And then there's 48 Hours is another movie I covered, and that's also an outstanding soundtrack. And then there are movies that, like Gorky Park, Uncommon Valor, or Cocoon, which was an outstanding movie. I need to put that on the list. And Commando, another amazing movie. So that's it for the opening credits. As always, I ask you to check out backlickcinema.com/shop. Check out for some new designs coming soon. And Bazaar de Alonso, while still not up as of this recording, I'm going to keep saying it until it goes up. Well, even after it goes up, but when it finally goes up, there will be such a celebration you'll hardly believe. But I really want to put that eBay shop up. And that's it for I got one more announcement. I was just a guest on a great podcast called Casual Nonsense. And we had a great time. We talked a little bit about podcasting. We also talked a little bit about movies, theater attendance, that sort of thing. So when you get a chance, check it out. Just check your social medias. Check my social medias. And then when it comes out, I will let you know through social media that the episode is out, and you can check it out. And you can check out that fantastic conversation. So that's it for the announcements. And now we're going to talk about some of our favorite parts. All right. Actually, like, the whole of this movie could be my favorite part. I just love the pacing and the aesthetic. It's so well acted. It was so good. So at least it was good to me. And some of the themes of the movie, it has to do with trust. And two kinds of trust. It's like, the first is like trust within your family. And this family happens to be just a husband and a wife. And you got to wonder, is there trust between them? Sometimes they sort of they're not dishonest with each other. It's like they talk, they communicate, but you get the feeling that they don't communicate enough, or when they do communicate, they don't. There is a certain lack of trust, and until it's almost too late, or they trust each other just in time. It's hard to. They're not exactly on the same wavelength, and because they're not always on the same wavelength, that causes them a certain amount of distrust between the two. And there's also that trust in authority figures. And I think that's one of the driving themes, is like, how much trust can you put into institutions like the police department? Or how much trust can you put into a police officer? How much can you trust people in authority? And this movie is sort of asked that question, and it tests that trust. And what can you do when someone in authority breaks that trust? That's the main questions. Like, what can you do? Like I asked earlier in the show, can you even call the police on the police? So let's get into it. It's kind of hard. Like I said, it's so many parts, but I'm going to start. As I was watching the movie, I'm making the notes. And so I'm just going to start from the top of the notes and go down like that. I'm not going to read off all the notes, just the parts that I found particularly satisfying. In the movie, as I mentioned, the couple is in their house. It's a very nice house. It's a very large house, not quite a mansion, but it's large enough. And it's just the two of them by themselves in this big house, and they're fairly successful. At least the husband is. Mike is, I guess he's a real estate developer, or or something. I don't know exactly what he does. I just I know in the movie that he and his lawyer are getting together. They're trying to buy this club, and they're going to make money off this club. And they're trying to close this deal with these other businessmen. And they're really close to closing this deal. And this is just his business, the kind of thing he does. And so there's a lot of money flowing through this family. And like he put $10,000 of his own money into the investment. So he's a yuppie. That's what we used to call him. Young urban professional. A yuppie. And things are generally going well for them. And then somebody breaks into their house and they get shook up because like the dude has Karen as Mike's wife at knife point. Like there's a point where he grabs the kitchen knife and he holds it to Karen's throat, and he basically uses that threat to get away and run out the house. But the threat of having your throat slashed with your own knife, it's a horrible thing to live through. And this is something it looks like the thief probably would have done. One of the things that they did is they kind of made it like the most frightening thing for a yuppie. A yuppie usually refers to young white men. So you have this young white couple and they're attacked by this big black man. And it's like, I think that was by design, because that is the picture that society wants to frighten you with. It seems to me anyway. So I think it's intentional that's why they chose a big black man breaking into a young white couple's house. They want to frighten the audience as much as possible. And this is the dynamic they chose in order to frighten the audience. So I can't really speak to how effective that was, but it's kind of one of the things I noticed is like when you're a black man and you see that they decided to choose a black man as a bad guy, it's the kind of thing that makes you want to go, It's like was it really necessary? Is this likely? Are they perpetrating a myth, or is this somebody's actual lived experience? So it's concerning sometimes, but these are the type of things that I have to confront when I'm watching the media, when I'm watching television, listening to an audiobook. I have to think about these things. I feel like I'm confronted with certain feelings when the issue of racial dynamics become a necessary part of the conversation. But anyway, after the police show up and, they start their investigation, and Officer Pete, gives his advice on how they should have an alarm and maybe an attack dog. They tell them they shouldn't get a gun because you're more likely to hurt yourself with the gun than to hurt an intruder. And that the intruder probably is probably not going to come back, since where they live at is a relatively safe place and crime is not a huge issue where they live at. They just so happen to be unlucky at that point. And they become friendly with the police officers. Like, he's a friendly guy and he's very helpful when they need help in getting the police to come and dust for prints, or they need help with the security company to come and install the alarm system. He pitches in and he helps them get the things that they need. He seems like a good guy. And then he invites, Pete, the officer, invites Mike on a ride along. It's like, because Mike expressed interest in getting revenge on the perp that came in and threatened his family. He thought about, it's like, man, what I wouldn't give to like just to show him what's what. Kick his ass, that he's kind of boisterous in that way. And it's understandable because the dude had threatened him and his wife and, had him had knife point, and he was basically powerless and he wanted to take back that power. And so that is that's understandable that he would feel that way. So Pete offers to take him on a police ride along where he could kind of see, where Mike can kind of see what it's life like, life on the streets is like, the elements, the type of situations that he and his partner, Roy Cole, the kind of situations that they have to deal with. So at the end of this ride along, they get to, well, they let Roy out. They let Roy Cole go out. And so now it's just Mike and Pete. And so Pete says, yeah, we can, I got a surprise for you or something like that. And they drive over to this, I don't know. It's some kind of, I guess they're houses or apartments or something like that. They look like really, it's like a trailer. I think it's a trailer house. They drive over to this trailer park or whatever. And it's like, yeah, the guy that broke into your house, we found him. He's right here. And then they, Pete does this police officer thing, open up, this is the police, and the guy comes and he grabs the guy and says, yeah, you like breaking into people's houses. And he got him pinned up and he's like, come over, Mike, come on and beat him up. And Mike is a little bit shocked at this. Mike is like, he talks the game, but he doesn't actually want to do it. I think he's a little bit frightened. And at the same time he doesn't want to attack this dude that's really being pinned down by the police officer. It's like something about the whole situation doesn't seem right with him. And so he's like hesitant to try, to take advantage of the situation. And so this is one of the parts that I really enjoyed about how in one circumstance, like when the adrenaline is flowing and you talk about how you want to, attack the person that took your power away. And then when you confronted with the situation as Mike was, when he had the opportunity to, kick the crap out of the dude that broke into his house, what he really wanted was justice. He didn't want revenge. He wanted justice. And it didn't feel right to him to attack this dude that's being held down by a police officer. And all the while, Pete is just wailing on this dude, just taking his nightstick to him, just kicking him on the ground, have him all binded up and his arms twisted all the way around his back, just going to town on dude. And so just basically beat him up in front of Mike, and Mike is in shock and he's shook. And that's, I really like that. I really like the change in Mike and showing his actual character. Not that Mike is a coward, is that there's a sense of fairness about him, and just beating up a dude while the dude is all binded up, it seemed unfair. It's like if he's going to beat up the dude, it would be in a fair fight or in a situation where the guy posed an imminent threat. That's when you fight. You don't fight when threat is over. And I think that's why Mike didn't feel like it was, let's say, appropriate to attack this dude that's being basically been hemmed up by police. And so that kind of leads me to my other favorite part, is that this whole experience of watching the police beat up this dude on the ground, it basically had Mike shook up, because not only did this dude beat up this perpetrator, he also threw the perpetrator in the back of the car. And so Mike had to ride with the dude in the back seat just after having been wailed on by the police officer. Apparently, because they didn't show like the order of events, but apparently Officer Pete drove Mike home and then took the perp wherever. Because when Karen asks when Karen asks Mike what happened to because Mike tells Karen that they caught the guy that broke into the house, and Karen is like, what? So they put him in jail? And And Mike says most likely he went to the hospital because I think that Mike got dropped off first, so he doesn't know exactly where Officer Pete took the perpetrator. But he's shook, and I like this because it feels like a realistic response. Like when you see somebody get the shit kicked out of them, sometimes that might leave you shook, and that's the way Mike was. He was shook up, and there was something about Pete, something that he saw in Pete that frightened him, and he didn't want to be around Pete anymore. And he told his wife, he says, stay away from that guy. And his wife, not having seen what Pete did, she's of kind of the mind that, you know, the dude probably got what he deserved. She's kind of like rationalizing how or why Pete would beat up this dude so badly. So she's thinking that, you know, the dude deserved it. Maybe the dude was resisting. And Mike was saying, you weren't there. I was there. You know, I saw this. We need to stay away from the dude. But Karen is not really paying attention. She's still looking at Pete as a hero because that's what Mike would have done. Because if somebody had told Mike that Officer Pete had beat the crap out of some dude, Mike probably wouldn't believe it. Mike would be the same way as his wife was being to him. It's like, Pete saved our lives. Well, maybe not saved their life, but Pete was very helpful, and he seemed to be a friend, and it's not, and she thinks that Mike is being unfair, and she's grateful that Pete got the guy that had a gun to her neck. So she's really not, she's not hearing Mike right now. But this kind of begins the bad cop cycle where Pete just kind of shows up uninvited. So he like shows up the next day while Karen is swimming in the swimming pool. He shows up at the club that Mike is trying to open, and I think Pete kind of knows that he's upset this family, but he's trying to pretend that he doesn't know what's going on. And I think that he knows because it's hinted at earlier in the film that there's something off about Pete. I think it's his partner, Roy, was like after they meet the couple for the first time and they leave the house, Roy had this thing where he said, like, I know what you think and you need to forget about it, or something like that. And they don't allude to it what it was, but Roy knows that man ain't right. And he's trying to put him on the straight and narrow or whatever. Or he's trying to let Pete knows that he's being watched. Like he's watching Pete. He's like, don't even think about it. But with Peter already thought about it. So we know something's up with Pete, and Pete, and they know something, like the couple, at least Mike knows there's something up with Pete, and Pete trying to pretend like everything is normal, and things are not normal. So Mike has to kick Pete out of the club. It was a private party anyway. See, actually earlier, back when they were friendly, Mike had said that Pete could come by because he was thinking about hiring Pete as like a security consultant. But after the thing with the ride along, he doesn't really want Pete hanging around. So he basically rescinded his invitation and kicked Pete out of the club. And Pete has this attitude like, what's going on? We're not friends anymore? And Pete is just really inserting himself in this family's life. And as this goes on, it feels really inappropriate, that to put it lightly. And then after he gets kicked out, he's got this, you can see the anger and jealousy that kind of builds up in him. And that leads to my next favorite part is Ray Liotta as an actor. As you can see the intensity, and it's so subtle. Like you can kind of see the subtle changes between his anger and his jealousy. It's like his pretty much all in his eyes. And it's the subtleness of the different emotions that he goes through that is so incredibly effective. It's like the facial expressions and the emotion he goes through when he's feigning innocence, or when he's pretending to be concerned, or when he gets angry, or when he gets, like I said, jealous. It's all of these emotional nooks and crannies that he goes through. You can see it play out all in his face, and the fact that how subtle it is, it's amazing what he can do. And you see it in this one particular scene where he's with a prostitute. I'm guessing she's a prostitute or a sex worker, we say nowadays, in his police car. So this is a woman that he knows that they're very familiar with each other, and they've probably had several rendezvous. There's something with him that he can't be with a regular woman. And and they never fully explore that in the movie. It's like he doesn't want to go through the work of meeting a single woman or whatever and developing a relationship. It's like he has difficulty doing that. And so he frequents sex workers, and there's one particular sex worker he's with, and they're in a car, and, he gets his needs met or whatever, but then he kind of dumps her out of the car. It's like he wants the whatever relief or satisfaction that she could give him, but he's mad that he has to go to her for that affection. That it's like she has like real affection for him, but he does not reciprocate because he feels dirty when he's with her, and that bothers him. Like, he hates that he has to be with her. And so he kind of turns on her and dumps her out of the police car. And then you also see the changes in facial expression when there's a point where, remember, Mike is over Pete. Mike wants Pete out of their lives, but Karen doesn't see it. So Karen had invited Mike over to do a career day type of thing at the school where, you get professionals to go and talk to the kids. That was the monologue that I did at the top of the show, where he's talking to kids about being a police officer. And then after that, he catches up with Karen and, invites Karen to go out to, to get a couple of drinks. And then she accepts. But then when they're out and they're drinking and they're talking and whatnot, she gets vibes. She gets the bad vibes off of Pete, because he seems a little bit, she realizes that he's a little bit too fixated on her. And she finally sees what her husband saw. It's like her husband had the attitude of, I say thee, woman, you shalt not see him. And she's an independent woman. And so she's not hearing that. She is offended that her husband would deign to try to command her to do anything, because she's independent. So she's, because she's offended that her husband would try to tell her what to do, she's rebellious is a good enough word for it. And so that's why she continues to be friendly with Pete. But then when she gets close to him and they're talking in this bar, she realized what her husband was trying to say, because she didn't see what her husband saw. And now, as she's talking to Pete, she sees it. She starts getting the bad vibes. She starts getting nervous and concerned for her safety. So, and shout out to Madeline Stowe for, while Ray Liotta is putting in the work of his acting chops. She's matching him point for point, right? She's, cause you can see the changes in her demeanor when she starts getting the bad vibe from her. And it's like, when you look at the conversation, it's innocuous. It doesn't feel, or it doesn't sound threatening. Like if you were to just read the words, or if you were to read this conversation that they had together in this bar off a page, reading them off the page doesn't feel or sound threatening, but it's the way that Officer Pete talks to and about Karen, that causes, and then some questions are inappropriate. Like he's, asking questions about their marriage and almost kind of suggesting that, your husband can't protect you like I can protect you. And those are some red flags. So it's in this conversation that she sees what her husband saw and is frightened. So I really like the change in her. I liked that part because of the acting and how she saw the light, and just Ray Liotta in general. Another one of my favorite parts, and it's one of my favorite parts, but it's also an unlikely scenario, where Mike starts getting problems. So like he goes to dinner and his credit card doesn't work. Now, I'm not certain how much power a beat cop has or the type of influence they might have, but I find it unlikely that a police officer would have enough influence to be able to cut off somebody's credit card. I don't know who he could call or what questions he could ask or who he could talk to, but I can't see a scenario. I can't envision a scenario where like a regular cop would have that much influence where he could affect your credit card. But it happens in the movie, and they never actually confirm that it was Officer Pete that did it, but it's heavily implied. But it's never confirmed, and there's no way that, I don't know what they could do to show that he actually had that type of influence. Also, his car gets booted. Also, the police are calling his investors and asking questions, making it seem like he's under some sort of investigation. So now his investors are getting scared and they're thinking about pulling out of the club. And there's a part where he and his wife, they're upstairs. They're, about to get intimate with each other, and they're not about to. They're fully intimate with each other. They're in it. They're in it to win it. They're doing the horizontal tango. They're balls deep, as it were, and then the alarm goes off. So they have to stop. No, actually, no, that's not what happens. They do have a false alarm, but it's when they're in the living room. Or in the kitchen. So they're in the kitchen. They're actually about to get busy in the kitchen. And then the alarm goes off and they check the house. It turns out to be a false alarm. They call the alarm company and let them know that it was a false alarm. In order for the alarm company to acknowledge that the alarm was false, he has to reset the security system. And then he has to tell them the password. And the password happened to be pyramid. And it's basically, it has to be a 7-letter password. And so then they continue their festivities upstairs. And that's when they, they're, like I said, intimate. And then while they're intimate, you see the door open and Officer Pete Davis is like watching them. It's like he has his flashlight and his gun out and he watches them for a few minutes. And then he turns on his flashlight. And so they, the couple, they're startled and they look and it's like Officer Pete is like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It was, and we got the call that this was an alarm." And so all of these, obviously he gets kicked out the house and everything, but it's all of these things are happening against Mike. And the reason these things are happening is that one of Pete's fixations is that they don't really allude too much, but you can tell from the context of the way he was talking and everything was, and his overall attitude toward Mike and Karen, is that he's jealous of how easy he assumes that everything comes easy to Mike. You know, Mike is upper middle class. He has a lot of money. Pete doesn't have as much money. Mike lives in a big and nice house in a nice neighborhood, and that's not what Pete has. He feels that everything comes easy to Pete. Pete feels everything comes easy to Mike. He feels that Karen comes easy to Mike. He feels that his money comes easy. Well, Pete feels that Mike's money comes easy to Mike, or that Mike's business deals comes easy to Mike, or Mike's cars come easy to Mike. So he hates the idea that things come to Mike easily, and he has to struggle to get the things that he needs, and all of his needs are not being met. So what he's doing is he's trying to make Mike's life more challenging, more difficult by doing things like having his car booted or cutting off his credit cards, if that is indeed him cutting off his credit card, or interrupting Mike and his wife while Mike and his wife are having sex, or anything that would cause Mike to have issues and complications. Mike having to deal with this is like, at first he tries to, under the advice of his lawyer, he tries to bribe Pete. Mike tries to bribe Pete. Mike tries to give Pete $5,000 so that Pete can leave them alone. But Pete says, I could just kill you, right? Pete punches Mike in the gut. He has Mike on the ground, and then Pete pulls out his gun and points it at Mike's head. And it's like, I could just kill you. And because Pete doesn't want the easy way out. Like, this is exactly the type of thing that Pete hates. Like, Mike is just trying to buy his way out of the troubles that he's in. And Pete sees it as like without saying it, you can just see it in his whole demeanor. He's already mad about how easily things come to Mike, and being able to bribe a police officer for the police officer to leave him alone. That's just another easy thing that Mike can do. Mike can just easily make the problems go away if Pete takes the bribe, and he doesn't want to take the bribe. He doesn't want to make he doesn't want Mike's life to be easier. He wants Mike's life to be more difficult. So he's doing everything in his power to make Mike's life difficult. So I felt that was well crafted. That's one of my favorite parts. There are a lot of stuff happens, a lot of drama before I get to my last part. So, Pete orchestrates one of the things that happened is that Mike goes to Officer Roy, Pete's partner, to try to get Roy to do something about his partner, because he already went to the police department to both Roy's and Pete's superiors to see if they could do something about Pete. He fills out a complaint, and that doesn't work. He tries to bribe Pete, and that doesn't work. So he goes to Pete's partner. And remember, Pete's partner knows about Pete. Like, he knows that Pete is a little bit off, and he doesn't want to help Mike at first, because, the officers are supposed to have each other's back, the thin blue line, that sort of thing. He really is, has this us and them mentality. But right here you have an innocent citizen just pleading for help, and there's really no other place he can go. And so Officer Roy Cole, being the stand-up guy, is like, he's going to talk to Pete. So he goes and talks to Pete. Basically, he tells Pete that he needs to take a leave of absence and go talk to a psychiatrist about his issues, because Roy knows about Pete. Roy knows that Pete isn't right in the head. That's probably why he stayed Pete's partner so he could try to keep Pete from diving into his baser instincts or going down a dark path. And maybe he's been able to do that before. Maybe this whole time Roy has been stopping Pete from harming people. And this is the one time where it doesn't work, because later on, Pete takes advantage of a situation where he could have his friend, his partner, killed, and then make it. Well, he actually does the killing. He kills Roy, and then makes it look like that the killing was done by a drug dealer. And so when the other police come to the crime scene and they're interviewing Pete tells his sob story about how, they were chasing the suspect and they got to he claims that his partner had got to the suspect first and that the suspect shot his partner, and his partner, while he was dying, shot the suspect dead. So that he told the story in such a way that he wasn't even involved. Right. So he orchestrates the killing of his partner, and now there's really nothing between. Oh, also he has Mike's house raided by narcotics division, and they find enough narcotics in Mike's house to send Mike away to jail for a very long time. So they could have charged Mike with possession with the intent to distribute. That's how much drugs he had in his house. This implies that Pete had at some point broken into their house, planted some drugs, and then reset the alarm and then left. It's probably a weak point. It's right. At some point, when they suspected that Pete was not normal, was not a normal dude, they should have changed the passcode and the password. Like the alarm system has a passcode, and when you call the alarm company, you have a password. And they hadn't changed any of that. So at any point, Pete could just bust into their house pretty much any way he wanted to, anytime he wanted to, because he's kind of an amateur security expert. So, and he helped set up the alarm system. So he knows his ins and outs and strengths and weaknesses of the alarm of the house of the people that he helped set up. But that's not what, they the couple never changed the alarm, at least not by that time. And so Pete has Mike Pete has Mike thrown in jail. He's not involved in the arrest. He just kind of sitting back in the background watching Mike go through the criminal justice system and having been convicted and thrown in jail. So after all of this, Mike and his lawyer, they managed to make bail, and Mike makes a beeline for his house because, he just got that feeling that Pete is up to something, and Pete was indeed up to something. He was in the house with basically playing house with Karen and having to kill Karen's best friend in order to do so. And just pretending like they're a couple. Like he's fixated to the point of thinking that she's deeply in love with him and that she wanted him to get rid of her husband. Like, so he's like, he's talking to her like, yeah, we can stop pretending. We can stop pretending that we're strangers. We can be the couple like we always meant to be. And it gets to the point where she has to forcibly reject him. They get into a fight and they get into a scuffle. And then when Pete realized that his delusion isn't working and that she's not, like Karen is not going along with Pete's delusion, and then he basically turns on her and thinks of her as, she's now she's the sex worker, just like the sex worker that he had in his car. And he says he's going to treat her like a whore, like the whore that she is, because now his mind has flipped. Now he doesn't see her as a love interest. He just sees her as a sex worker. And he hates sex workers because he hates how that makes him feel. I think that sex workers make him feel inadequate or unworthy. So now he's attacking her. She's trying to get away. And at that point, Mike bursts in the house just in time and they have a struggle. At first, Mike throws a rock to Pete's car, and this is just to get Pete's attention. And then after he throws a rock to Pete's car, he bursts into the house. The alarm goes off. There's a bunch of fighting. And then there's a point where Pete has the advantage. But the problem is that the alarm has gone off. And so he resets the alarm and he calls the alarm company. And he tells them that the password is pyramid and tries to tell them that's a false alarm. And the alarm company says that the password has changed. And so he looks at Mike and is like, what's the password? What's the password? And Mike says, it's 7 letters. Fuck you. And so they endure in the scuffle again. And Mike manages to push Pete down the stairs. And it seems like Mike is out. He's either dead or knocked out. So they think it's pretty much over, but this is a thriller. So obviously this is a false ending. And while Mike and Karen are talking, Pete rises up behind Mike. Mike happens to have Pete's gun that they had been struggling over. And then Pete has his attitude is like, what are you going to do? Shoot me? And that's what Mike does. Mike basically empties the clip on Pete. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. What's the aftermath? We don't know. So, the thing is, in the end, all the police start showing up at their house and we don't know what's going to happen to Mike. We don't know if he's going to go back to jail. He's probably going to go back to jail because he just killed a police officer. Will they be able to prove that the police officer broke into the house? Well, Karen's there. Karen's still alive, so she can vouch for everything. She could at the very least vouch for everything that Pete did. They'll probably believe her. And Pete has no business being at their house in the first place. They won't be able to prove that Pete killed his own partner or anything like that. So it's kind of hard to know what the aftermath of this is going to be that doesn't involve Mike going to jail. But we don't know that because the movie just kind of ended at that point. Basically relieved that both Mike and Karen are safe. But that sequence, that's a great sequence of this movie. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie, that particular sequence. It was very satisfying how that all ended. So it worked out pretty good. That's it for our favorite parts. So now let's dive into the trivia. Kurt Russell and Madeline Stowe refused to use body doubles for the sex scene. And this is very interesting because this is at a time before they had intimacy coordinators. As a matter of fact, I believe that is a rather recent innovation. So it would be interesting to figure out how they got themselves mentally prepared to do these scenes. I understand that in some cases they could be rather difficult. And this suggests that both Russell and Stowe were comfortable with each other in order to do these scenes. Ray Liotta and Roger E. Mosley played the police team of Officer Pete Davis and Officer Roy Cole. They've been partners for years. This is great casting because both Liotta and Ray shared the same birthday, December 18th, and they were both left-handed. A Bollywood remake of this movie came out in 1996 and is called Fareb or Fareb. I'm not sure. I guess I should have checked the pronunciation. The thing is that I saw some clips of this movie on YouTube, and the clips that I saw, they all look kind of like music videos, and the movie itself is more than 2 hours long. So this is kind of like the musical version of Unlawful Entry. Ray Liotta's character drives a 1973 Dodge Charger SE as a personal car. He said it was a 440 engine, but originally was a 318 engine. One of a cycle of thrillers made during the early 1990s, which were set around husband and wife characters. The films include Pacific Heights, Presumed Innocent, Sleeping with the Enemy, A Kiss Before Dying, Deceived, Shattered, Mortal Thoughts, Consenting Adults, and Guilty as Sin, and Malice. Of all of these, I've seen only Sleeping with the Enemy, and that's it. I had to look to make sure. And yeah, I don't know. I was just really into a lot of these movies. For his portrayal of a psychotic cop, Ray Liotta got nominated for an MTV Movie Award in 1993 for Best Villain for this movie. However, he would lose to Jennifer Jason Leigh for her performance in Single White Female, which I did see. Tom Berenger, Mel Gibson, Charlie Sheen, and John Travolta all turned down the role of Officer Pete Davis. Kevin Bacon was also considered. And finally, in case you were wondering, legally speaking, an unlawful entry can be defined as an illegal entry upon lands or structures without force, but by means of fraud or other willful wrong. It is closely related to housebreaking, but unlike housebreaking, the intent to commit an offense within the place entered is not needed for this offense. The basis of proof for this offense is that the entry was unlawful and that the conduct of the accused was contrary to good order and discipline. Burglary may be one of the three types: forcible entry, attempted forcible entry, or unlawful entry. Unlawful entry refers to persons without the legal right to be on the property and who have gained entry even though force was not used. So that's it for the trivia. Now let's check out what the critics thought. So the critics have it at 76%. So audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is 49%. And on IMDb reviews, it's at 6.4. I am surprised. For one thing, I'm surprised that the critics rated so highly and the audience rated it so poorly. I don't understand the mismatch. It doesn't make any sense to me. I thought this was a great movie. And it's like the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is much less consistent than it is on IMDb reviews. What I have noticed is that the IMDb tend to be, well, the scores tend to be lower than the Rotten Tomatoes audience score. But in this case, it's flip-flop. It's strange. It's rarely seen. I hardly ever see it this way. But I guess it's fair to say that I agree with the critics on this one. So Bob Shelton from the Birmingham Post wrote, "Well told, if not altogether plausible, Unlawful Entry should give thriller lovers a pleasant jolt of anxiety." And yes, I feel like that is accurate. Brian D. Johnson from Maclean's Magazine wrote, "Unlawful Entry has all the hallmarks of a down and dirty thriller, implausibly gullible. Stowe's character is just a slow-witted object of desire. So I would push back upon that, because the reason that she acts the way she acts is because it's based on emotion. It's not based on knowledge, right? Because she doesn't have, like, I think that what he's saying is like when she doesn't, when her husband says like, you know, I saw this cop beat up this dude and I want you to stay away from this cop. She doesn't know. It doesn't make her slow with it because she doesn't know. Her husband says that a cop beat up this dude, but she doesn't have the context for it. The dude that the cop beat up was the dude that had a knife to her throat. So she doesn't have any sympathy for that dude. So she doesn't see any reason why the cop, who was friendly towards them and extremely helpful, should be kept away from the family or kept away from their home. She doesn't see that. So I don't really see her as dim-witted. Like when she catches on fairly quick, like all she had to do was talk to the dude. When she started talking to the dude, when she started talking to Pete, she realized that Pete was dangerous. And at that point, her and her husband were in the same wavelength. She finally saw what her husband saw. So no, she's not slow with it. So I think this is a misinterpretation of the character. Yes, it has some implausible points, and we talked about that earlier. Joe Berry from Empire Magazine wrote, "A wonderfully nasty turn from Leota, along with a novel treatment of familiar plot lines, elevates Kaplan's effort into the must-see category." And yes, I agree with this assessment. It's definitely a must-see movie. And Fred Topé of About.com wrote, "Below average thriller. The power of a cop is scary, but most of the plot points are standard thriller moments, right down to the scary cat." And I don't know. I watched a lot of thrillers. I guess I'm just susceptible to thrillers because I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed a lot of the other thrillers I've seen. There are very few thrillers that have disappointed me, but this is one of those things where your mileage may vary. Sometimes it's like a comedy, like a thriller is meant to evoke a certain emotion, and it's not going to work on everybody. And it certainly didn't work on Fred, but it worked on me. And I think that it'll work on you. Finally, Unlawful Entry is, as of this recording, available on streaming. That's it for today. That was certainly dramatic and exciting. Next week, we're changing the mood completely while we continue with the themes of trust and dishonesty. We'll examine it from a completely different perspective. Join me next week as we drop on Jim Carrey and his film Liar Liar. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlickcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. One last time, if you like the show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlick Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.